Today has been, I love listening to Clarence. Another Clarence is always good to listen to. Christian, there's so many good speakers today. And I'm here to talk to you about one of the most difficult issues for First Nations, which is taxation. And I just want to be clear that I don't spell it T-A-X-E-S. I want to teach you a different way of spelling and thinking about taxes. So here on the West Coast, we had what was called a trade language called Chinook. Everybody in Alberta East thinks Chinook was just hot air coming from British Columbia, but it was actually a trade language that we spoke. It is really and truly the language of reconciliation. It includes native languages from the Pacific Northwest, French and English, and a little bit of Portuguese. And that language talks about taxes. And it's spelled T-A-K-S-I-S. And so one of the most important dates that Clarence Louis talked about, Chief Louis, was 1846. That's when the British and American governments decided the 49th parallel would be the boundary. But it's also important in the United States within the context of its history, because then they implemented what they called manifest destiny. So they were able to move into Texas, move into Colorado, New Mexico, and in California and Arizona. And all of that was assumed in those critical years from 1846 to about 1848. And so taxes is something that is the blood of government. So all of us are familiar with programs. Talk about programs. We need more programs. We need more programs for health, for justice issues, all of those things. All of that is derived from tax jurisdiction. And what happened when cannabis was legalized, not only we were not a part of Bill C-45, but the federal government approached the provincial and territorial governments and divided up the tax revenues that would be collected in our communities and shared with them. Nowhere in those agreements is a mention of First Nation or nation-to-nation governments or First Nation sovereignty. So what I'm proposing is a simple concept. If you look at the provinces, all of them have got their own stamp. The territories have their own stamp. What we have to have in this country is our own stamp, a First Nation stamp, so that we can trade amongst ourselves. One of the most important lessons that I've learned is economic development, creating economic wealth, betterment of our communities, better health care. When we lift our people out of poverty, we can function as communities. We can function as governments. And we will do that only by talking about what our ancestors talked about, implementing their wise words. In our community, we always talked about the Wilfrid Laurier Memorial. In that memorial, we talked about, let us work together so that each of us will be great and good. So in order to change Bill C-45, this can't happen by one community. All of us right across this country have got to stand up and say, we want Bill C-45 amended so that the cannabis legislation reflects the reality of this country, which is First Nations have to be considered a government. We can't be operating under somebody else's jurisdiction. And because of the way the amendments or the legislation was proposed and implemented, that means laws of general application, provincial laws of general application apply on Indian reserves. Who owns Indian reserves? We maintain, we do. But the federal government says that it is our land and you have the use and benefit of it. The title of those lands are registered to Her Majesty. Those fundamental areas have got to change. And so here in Canada, when we talk about sovereignty, and I have a working relationship with NITA, which is the national tribes working together on taxation, about 200 of them. They're going to have the same situation as what we're experiencing here in Canada right now. They talk about sovereignty. Sovereignty means that you can trade and sell goods on your own lands. If you want to extend beyond that, then you're going to have a working relationship with another tribe or another community. That doesn't make us part of the market-based economy on a global scale. You heard what Christian Sinclair was talking about. His vision is what we're talking about. We want to be an international player. But that can't happen with delegated jurisdiction. We have to be able to create our own national institution. And all of these institutions that were aimed at creating an economic approach were started after the Second World War. It's called the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation. That's why during the SNC-Lavalin situation here in Canada, they called on that organization to investigate what was going on. So standards and regulations are a critical component for international trade. So we have to accept the fact that if we want to be part of the market-based economy, we have to be able to have standards. We have to have rules and regulations. My premise is that we can invent that ourselves, and we've done that. We've done that through the creation of institutions that help facilitate real economic development and growth. You heard that through Frank Bush talking about the First Nations Finance Authority. One of the other institutions that's going to be critical for us to move forward is the creation of our own infrastructure institute so that we can use other revenue sources and lever that on an international basis to help communities lift up themselves. You know, I was in Oka after 1990. I tried to go there during that summer. 1990 was a watershed year for First Nations right across this country. Not only did people stand up and talk about our land rights, Elijah Harper stood up and said, when we're talking about the fundamental law of this land, which is the Canadian Constitution, you can't exclude us. The reality of that situation is now here. We asked the government to ensure that we were part of this initiative. It's going to be a $1 trillion operation. But yet, as we found ourselves in the situation where we've been excluded, the federal government has nobody else to blame other than themselves. They were told repeatedly what would happen in Oka and other communities right across this country. It's what I characterize as a dog's breakfast. You're having communities having to struggle to develop their own laws. How do you enforce those laws? You have communities that want to be part of the market-based economy, so they've pursued, and rightfully so, licensed operations. But when we're talking about taxes, monies that are generated within our boundaries should stay with our communities. We should have a mechanism where we can share some of those resources to lift up communities like Oka, because they're the smallest community amongst the Mohawks. But there are many, many other communities right across this country like that. And there's no way we can lift one another up if we just look at reserves as geographically blessed communities. West Bank will survive. My community in Kamloops will survive. Squamish will survive. Satina will survive. The communities involved in Capion in downtown Winnipeg will survive because of the geographic locations. So this is an incredible opportunity for us collectively to assert our rights, but it only can happen if we choose to work together and create a national institution to be able to facilitate it. And it has to be not mandatory, but optional. Our communities have to have the right to choose, because some communities don't want this, but other communities do. But under the existing national framework, communities in Quebec have no choice. If they want to be a dry community and not want cannabis in their communities, they have no choice because of the way the legislation was drafted. So for me, it's very, very simple. And I'm here to ask for your support, because if we don't work together on this, we're going to be toast. You know, I heard a lot of words today about, hi, how are you? Joint pain. Those take on different meanings now. And it isn't just the retail aspects, it's the health aspects, the safety, the regulatory regimes that our communities need. And we can't do it alone. It's all of us in this room. You're going to be at the forefront of leading this struggle so that our entrepreneurs can succeed, our governments can succeed, and we will be able to look after ourselves, because that's what our ancestors talked about. We talked about, let us work together so that each of us will be great and good. So study this stamp. I think it's pretty good. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny. And I just want to thank Manny for agreeing to be last on deck. He allowed the provincial folks to come up because one of the delegates had to leave. So we've reached the end of the day, folks, and I want to thank you for staying. Like I said, we now have about 50% of the room that has stayed, and that's pretty darn good. So as a gesture of recognition and appreciation, Howard has indicated that there's a casino fun night, and that there's drinks and there's hors d'oeuvres. And if you go out to the lobby, you can go there now or go and freshen up or whatever the case may be. But there will be a fun night, and you will find in the main lobby that there's balloons that will guide you to the casino. Yeah, so have fun, and we'll see you in the morning, and thank you for your time today.